The chilling winter wind of 1878 howled through the dusty streets of Raton, New Mexico Territory, as Prudence Hayes stepped off the stagecoach, her leather-bound teaching certificate clutched tightly to her chest. The mountain town, nestled at the base of the imposing Raton Pass, was nothing like her home in Boston, but the advertisement for a schoolteacher had promised a decent wage and a chance to make a difference, exactly what a 24-year-old woman with ambition and no prospects back east needed. "Miss Hayes, I presume?" A portly man with a silver pocket watch approached her, mustache quivering as he spoke. "Mayor Thompson, we've been expecting you." Prudence straightened her back, refusing to show how the journey had exhausted her. "A pleasure to meet you, Mayor. I'm eager to begin my duties." "The schoolhouse is ready," he replied, helping her gather her trunks. "Though I should warn you, these frontier children can be challenging. The last teacher left after 3 months. I assure you, sir, I'm quite capable of managing a classroom," Prudence said, her voice as crisp as her high-collared dress. "Education requires discipline and structure." The mayor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well then, let's get you settled." The one-room schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower that seemed to lean slightly to the left. Inside, rough-hewn desks were arranged in neat rows, and a pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner. This would be her domain, and Prudence was determined to bring civilization to this wild corner of the territory, one lesson at a time. When school began the following Monday, 23 children of various ages filed into the classroom, their curious eyes taking in the new teacher with her Eastern clothes and rigid posture. "Good morning, students," Prudence announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am Miss Hayes, and I will be your teacher. In this classroom, you will learn reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and proper deportment. I expect complete attention, perfect attendance, and absolute obedience." A few of the older boys exchanged glances, while the younger children shifted nervously in their seats. "We will begin with roll call, followed by an assessment of your current educational levels," Prudence continued, opening her leather-bound ledger. "When I call your name, you will stand, say present, and remain standing until I instruct you to sit." By the end of the first week, the whispers had already begun to circulate through town. "Too strict," the mothers murmured at the general store. "My Johnny says she made him stand in the corner for an hour just for dropping his slate," complained Mrs. Miller. "My Sarah came home crying because she couldn't recite her multiplication tables," added Mrs. Thornton. "What does that woman expect? Sarah's only 7. But Prudence paid no mind to the gossip. She had standards, and she would not lower them simply because these were frontier children. Education was their ticket to a better life, and she would not fail them by being lenient. It was on the second Friday of her tenure that Zachary Newcomb first darkened her doorway. School had just let out, and Prudence was at her desk, grading spelling tests with her red pencil, when the door swung open without so much as a knock. "Miss Hayes." The deep voice filled the small schoolhouse. Prudence looked up, startled by the interruption. Before her stood a tall man in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and the spurs on his boots jingled softly as he took off his wide-brimmed hat. "Yes," she replied, standing. "The school day is over, sir. If you have business here, you should return Monday." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm afraid my business can't wait until Monday. I'm Zachary Newcomb. My son William is in your class." Prudence's mind quickly recalled the quiet boy with intelligent eyes who sat in the third row. "Ah, yes, William. He shows promise in mathematics, but his penmanship leaves much to be desired." "That's what I'm here about," Zachary said, taking a step forward. "William came home yesterday with blisters on his hands from writing lines. 100 times. I will not daydream during lessons." Prudence stiffened. "Discipline is necessary for learning, Mr. Newcomb. Your son was staring out the window during our grammar lesson." "He was looking at a hawk's nest," Zachary countered. "William's mother died last spring. Since then, he's found comfort in watching birds. Says they remind him of her spirit being free." The revelation knocked some of the starch out of Prudence's posture, but she recovered quickly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Newcomb, but rules are rules. If I make an exception for William, I must do so for all students." Zachary studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. You know, Miss Hayes, there's more than one way to teach a child. I'm quite aware of pedagogical methods, Mr. Newcomb. I was top of my class at the Massachusetts Normal School. I don't doubt your book learning, he said, placing his hat back on his head. But out here, we need more than just knowledge from our teachers. We need heart. With that, he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. That night, Prudence tossed and turned in her small bed above the mercantile, where she rented a room. Mr. Newcomb's words echoed in her mind. Heart. What did he know of teaching? He was just a rancher, a widower struggling to raise a boy alone. Yet something about his challenge gnawed at her. Prudence had always believed that strict discipline was a form of caring, preparing children for the harsh realities of life. But was there another way? The next morning, a Saturday, Prudence decided to take a walk through the town, partly to clear her head and partly to familiarize herself with the community she now called home. Raton was growing, thanks to the railroad that had recently connected it to larger markets, but it still maintained its frontier character. Wooden sidewalks lined the main street, where merchants were already opening their shops for the day's business. As she passed the livery stable, she heard a familiar voice. Zachary Newcomb was speaking to a small group of children, including his son William. They were gathered around what appeared to be an injured fawn. Gently now, Zachary was saying, guiding William's hand to the animal's leg. That's right. Hold it steady while I wrap the bandage. Prudence stopped to watch, staying partially hidden behind a water trough. The children were entranced, their faces showing a mixture of concern for the fawn and admiration for Mr. Newcomb. Will she live, Pa? William asked, his voice small but hopeful. With proper care, I believe she will, Zachary replied, tying off the bandage. Animals are resilient creatures, just like people. They just need a chance to heal. Can we keep her at our ranch? Another child asked. For now, Zachary nodded. Until she's strong enough to return to the wild. That's where she belongs. Prudence found herself moved by the scene. Here was a lesson being taught about compassion, about healing, about the natural world, and not a single child was daydreaming or fidgeting. They were learning through experience, their hearts engaged alongside their minds. She must have made a sound, for Zachary suddenly looked up and caught her eye. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the dusty yard. Then, to Prudence's surprise, he smiled and beckoned her over. Miss Hayes, come join our impromptu natural science lesson. Hesitantly, Prudence approached the group. The children's expressions ranged from surprise to wariness at seeing their strict teacher outside the classroom. We found this fawn near the creek, Zachary explained. Seems she got caught in some barbed wire. Would you like to help us tend to her? I'm not familiar with animal care, Prudence admitted. There's a first time for everything, Zachary replied, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been challenge or amusement. William, why don't you show Miss Hayes how to check the fawn's pulse? William looked up at her with uncertainty, but then guided her hand to the fawn's neck. Right here, Miss Hayes. You can feel her heart beating. And indeed, she could, the rapid, delicate rhythm of life pulsing beneath her fingertips. Prudence felt something shift within her, a small crack in the rigid framework that had governed her understanding of education and care. The morning turned into afternoon as the children took turns watching over the fawn, bringing it water, and discussing what they knew about deer. Prudence found herself listening more than speaking, amazed at the knowledge these uncivilized frontier children possessed about the natural world around them. When the children were finally sent home for lunch, Prudence remained, helping Zachary prepare a soft bed of hay for the fawn in the stable. You're good with them, she said quietly. The children, I mean. Zachary paused, wiping his hands on a rag. I've had practice. Not just with William, but with all the ranch hands' kids too. They come by often. They respect you. They know I respect them, he corrected gently. Children are people, Miss Hayes. Small people with big feelings and curious minds. Prudence bristled slightly at the implied criticism. I respect my students. I want them to succeed. I believe you do, Zachary said, surprising her. But sometimes, the path to success isn't straight and narrow. Sometimes it winds through creeks and over hills, with detours to watch hawks and rescue fawns. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Prudence didn't feel judged by this man, but seen. Would you join William and me for supper tonight? Zachary asked suddenly. Nothing fancy, I'm afraid. Just some venison stew and cornbread. The invitation startled her. That wouldn't be appropriate, Mr. Newcomb. I'm William's teacher, and I'm a member of the school board, he replied with a slight smile. Consider it a professional discussion about educational philosophy. Despite her better judgment, Prudence found herself accepting the invitation. The Newcomb ranch was modest but well kept, situated on a rise that overlooked a stretch of grassy plains with mountains in the distance. The main house was built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled into the evening sky. William greeted her at the door, more animated than she'd ever seen him at school. Pa said you'd come. I want to show you my bird drawings after supper. I'd like that, William, Prudence replied, surprised at how easily the words came. Zachary appeared behind his son, wearing a clean shirt with his hair still damp from washing. Welcome to our home, Miss Hayes. The inside of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and shelves lined with books more than she would have expected in a rancher's home. A collection of detailed sketches of birds hung on one wall, clearly William's work, and surprisingly accomplished for a 10-year-old. These are remarkable, Prudence said, examining the drawings. William, you have a real talent. The boy beamed, glancing at his father with pride. He gets it from his mother, Zachary explained. Elizabeth was an artist. She taught William to observe carefully, to see the details that others miss. Supper was indeed simple but delicious, and Prudence found herself relaxing in the warm kitchen, listening as William chattered about the birds he'd spotted that week and Zachary discussed the challenges of the upcoming cattle drive. Do you miss Boston? Zachary asked as they sat by the fire after the meal, William having gone to feed the fawn in the barn. Prudence considered the question. Sometimes. I miss the libraries and concerts. The sense of permanence. Everything here feels so new, so raw. It is, Zachary acknowledged. But there's beauty in the building, in watching something grow from nothing. He gazed into the fire. When Elizabeth and I came here 6 years ago, there was just open land. Now there's a home, a herd, a life we created. I'm sorry about your wife, Prudence said softly. Thank you. His voice was equally soft. It's been hard, especially for William. He was so young when she got sick, just 6. She taught him at home, you know, reading, writing, but also about the world around him. Birds were their special connection. Understanding dawned on Prudence. And that's why he watches them during class. Zachary nodded. I was harsh with you the other day, and I apologize for that. But I needed you to understand that William isn't being disrespectful when his attention wanders. He's holding on to his mother in the only way he knows how. Prudence felt ashamed of her rigid response, her failure to see beyond the behavior to the child's need. I should be the one apologizing, Mr. Newcomb. Zach, he corrected with a small smile. Out here, formality only goes so far. Then you must call me Prudence. She hesitated. Zach, I want to be a good teacher. I truly do. But I was taught that discipline and structure were paramount. They have their place, he agreed. But so does joy. Learning should be a discovery, not a punishment. By the time Zachary drove her back to town in his wagon, the stars were bright overhead and Prudence's mind was full of new ideas. She had always seen teaching as imparting knowledge, but perhaps it was also about nurturing spirits, about seeing each child as they were, not just as she wanted them to be. The following Monday, Prudence stood before her class with a new resolve. Good morning, students. Today, we're going to try something different. Instead of the usual grammar lesson, she led the children outside to the small creek behind the schoolhouse. We're going to study nature today, she announced. I want each of you to find something interesting, a rock, a plant, an insect, and we'll learn about it together. The children's initial shock gave way to enthusiasm as they scattered along the creek bank, searching for treasures. William found a blue jay feather and explained to the class how the coloration helped the bird blend with the sky. Little Sarah Thornton discovered a uniquely patterned rock, which led to a discussion of geology and the forces that shaped the mountains around them. By the end of the day, Prudence had covered most of her planned curriculum, writing descriptions of their findings, calculating the dimensions of various objects, discussing the history of exploration in the territory, but in a way that engaged the children's curiosity and excitement. As the students filed out at day's end, their faces flushed with the pleasure of learning, William lingered behind. "Miss Hayes," he said hesitantly. "Yes, William. Thank you for today. It was like how my ma used to teach me." His words touched her deeply. "You're very welcome. Would you like to bring some of your bird drawings to share with the class tomorrow? I think the other students could learn a lot from them." William's face lit up. "Really?" "Yes, madam." As he ran off to catch up with his friends, Prudence noticed Zachary leaning against the schoolhouse door, watching with a thoughtful expression. "That was quite a transformation," he said as she approached. "It was an experiment," she replied, "but I think it was successful." The children certainly thought so. "I've never seen them leave school so reluctantly." He fell into step beside her as she walked toward town. "What changed your mind?" "You did," Prudence admitted. "And William. And that fawn. I realized there are many ways to teach, and perhaps my way wasn't the only right one." Over the following weeks, Prudence found a balance between structure and exploration in her teaching. She maintained her high standards, but learned to adapt her methods to the needs and interests of each child. Reading lessons took place under the shade of cottonwood trees. Math problems involved counting cattle or measuring distances on maps of the territory, and history came alive through the stories of local elders who visited the classroom. The whispers in town changed. "Have you seen what Miss Hayes is doing with the children?" mothers now asked. "My Johnny actually wants to go to school. Sarah recited the entire multiplication table yesterday, and she wasn't even scared. Said Miss Hayes helped her make a song out of it." Prudence found herself increasingly drawn to the Newcomb ranch. What began as occasional visits to check on the fawn's recovery turned into regular Sunday dinners and afternoons spent helping William with his growing collection of bird studies. She discovered that Zachary was not just a rancher but a well-read man with progressive ideas about education, having attended college in St. Louis before coming west with his wife. For his part, Zachary began finding reasons to visit the schoolhouse, bringing books for the small library, helping to build new shelves for the students' nature collections, stopping by to invite Prudence to community gatherings. It was during the spring festival in May that their relationship shifted. The town had gathered for a picnic and dance in the meadow near the creek, with tables laden with food and a small band playing lively tunes. Prudence watched her students playing games, their faces alight with joy, and felt a surge of pride in how far they'd all come. "They're flourishing," Zachary said, appearing at her side with 2 cups of lemonade. "Just like that fawn we saved." "They are," Prudence agreed, accepting the drink. "And speaking of the fawn, released her last week." William cried, but he understood it was time for her to go back to her own kind. Zachary smiled. "He's resilient, like his mother was. And like his father," Prudence added softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of how their lives had become intertwined over the past months. "Would you care to dance, Miss Hayes?" Zachary asked, offering his hand as the band struck up a waltz. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Newcomb," she replied with a smile, taking his hand. As they moved across the grassy dance floor, Prudence was acutely aware of the townspeople watching them, of the speculation in their glances. But for once, she didn't care about propriety or appearances. She was simply happy, here in this moment, with this man who had challenged her to be better. "You've changed this town," Zachary said as he guided her through the steps of the dance. "The children, the parents, they all see education differently now." "You've changed me," Prudence replied honestly. "I came here thinking I knew everything about teaching. But you showed me what it truly means to nurture a child's mind and spirit." "We make a good team," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. The summer brought new challenges. As the school term ended, Prudence faced the prospect of returning to Boston. Her contract had been for 1 year, and despite the school board's offer to renew it, she found herself torn. Her family expected her return, and part of her missed the civilization of the East. Yet another part, a growing, insistent part, couldn't imagine leaving Raton, leaving the children she'd come to love, leaving Zachary and William. It was William who confronted her directly, coming to her room above the mercantile one evening in late June. "Are you leaving us, Miss Hayes?" he asked, his young face serious. "I haven't decided yet, William," she answered honestly, inviting him to sit in the small parlor. "I miss my family in Boston. But we're your family now, too," he said with the directness of childhood. "You and Pa, you like each other. I can tell." Prudence felt her cheeks flush. Your father and I are friends, William. My ma told me before she died that someday Pa might find someone else to love, William continued, undeterred. She said I'd know she was the right one if she loved me too, not just Pa. Tears pricked at Prudence's eyes. William, you love all of us kids, he pressed on. Even Johnny Miller who puts frogs in your desk. I've seen how you look at each of us, like you're proud, even when we make mistakes. That's what Ma did too. His words struck her silent. Was that love? This fierce pride, this desire to see each child grow and flourish, this joy in their accomplishments and ache at their struggles? If so, then yes, she loved them all with a teacher's heart that had somehow expanded beyond her rigid training to embrace the messy, wonderful reality of helping young minds develop. And Zachary? What was this feeling that fluttered in her chest whenever he was near? This sense of rightness when they discussed books or education or simply watched the sunset together. I need time to think, William, she finally said. But thank you for coming to me. Your honesty means a great deal. After William left, Prudence sat by her window, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. The beauty of this wild place had worked its way into her soul, just as its people had worked their way into her heart. The next morning, she made her decision. She would stay not just for another year, but indefinitely. Raton was home now. She sent a letter to her family in Boston explaining her choice, then walked to the Newcomb ranch, determined to tell Zachary in person. She found him in the barn, repairing a saddle, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms tanned by the sun. Prudence, he said, looking up with surprise and pleasure. I didn't expect you today. I've made a decision, she announced without preamble. I'm staying in Raton. I've signed another contract with the school board. Zachary's face broke into a wide smile. That's wonderful news. The children will be thrilled. And you? Prudence asked, suddenly uncertain. Are you pleased as well? He set aside the saddle and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. More than pleased, he said quietly. These past months, watching you with William, with all the children, seeing your dedication, your willingness to change and grow. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Prudence, I've come to care for you deeply. Her heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. Zachary, I know it might be too soon, he continued. After Elizabeth, I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. But you've brought something back to life in me, just as you did with that schoolhouse. It's not too soon, Prudence whispered. I care for you too, and for William. You've both taught me so much about what matters in life, about how love and learning are intertwined. He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. May I kiss you, Miss Hayes? He asked with a smile that made her pulse quicken. I believe that would be appropriate, Mr. Newcomb, she replied, her own smile breaking free as she leaned toward him. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of deeper feelings to come. When they parted, Zachary kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. William will be ecstatic, he murmured. He's been plotting to keep you here for months. Prudence laughed. He visited me yesterday. Made quite the case for why I should stay. That boy, Zachary sighed, though his eyes sparkled with pride. Too clever for his own good sometimes. He takes after his father, Prudence teased. Their courtship unfolded over the summer months, as Prudence helped with the ranch and prepared for the new school year. The town watched with approval as the strict schoolteacher who had softened their children's education now softened herself under the attention of the widowed rancher. By the time school resumed in September, Zachary had proposed, offering a simple silver ring with a small sapphire that had once belonged to his mother. It doesn't have to be right away, he assured her as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset. We can wait until you're ready. But Prudence didn't want to wait. They were married in October, in a simple ceremony in the schoolhouse, with William standing proudly at his father's side and all of Prudence's students in attendance. Mayor Thompson officiated, beaming at the union he claimed credit for, having hired Prudence in the first place. I knew she'd bring civilization to our town, he declared at the reception, though I didn't expect it to happen quite like this. Prudence continued teaching, now living at the ranch and riding into town each day with William. She expanded the curriculum, started a small library, and even convinced the town council to fund the construction of a larger schoolhouse to accommodate the growing number of students as Raton prospered. The following spring brought another joy, the discovery that Prudence was expecting a child. William was overjoyed at the prospect of being a big brother and spent hours explaining to his friends how he would teach the baby everything he knew about birds and horses and the stars. "I hope you don't mind," Zachary said one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively on Prudence's growing belly. "If it's a girl, I'd like to name her Elizabeth, after her mother." Tears filled Prudence's eyes. "I think that's beautiful. And if it's a boy?" "Thomas, after my father," Zachary suggested. "Unless you prefer a family name of your own?" "Thomas is perfect," Prudence agreed, covering his hand with hers as the baby kicked. Strong and steady, like his father and brother. As it happened, they welcomed Thomas Newcomb into the world on a bright July morning in 1880, with William pacing anxiously outside with his father until they were called in to meet the newest member of their family. "He's so small," William whispered, looking at his red-faced brother with awe. "You were even smaller," Zachary assured him, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his wife and new son. Prudence looked up at them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. This family, this life so different from anything she had imagined for herself when she stepped off that stagecoach 18 months earlier. She took a leave from teaching for the remainder of the year, but by the following September, she was back in the classroom with baby Thomas often accompanying her. The children adored having the infant at school, and Prudence found that his presence softened the atmosphere even further. "You've created quite the family atmosphere in there," Zachary observed one afternoon when he came to walk her home. A far cry from the strict Miss Hayes who first arrived. "I had a good teacher," Prudence replied, linking her arm with his. "Someone who showed me that love is at the heart of all true education." As they walked home together, William running ahead with his latest bird sketch and baby Thomas sleeping against his mother's shoulder, Prudence reflected on how completely her life had transformed. She had come to Raton believing that discipline alone would shape young minds, but instead, she had discovered that it was love, patient, attentive, joyful love that truly changed lives. And her own life had been changed most of all, shaped by the love of a man who had seen beyond her rigid exterior to the passionate heart beneath, by the trust of a boy who had shared his grief and hope with her, and by the 23 children who had taught her as much as she had taught them. Over the years, Prudence and Zachary's family continued to grow. Elizabeth joined them 2 years after Thomas, a dark-haired girl with her father's eyes and her namesake's artistic talent. Samuel followed 3 years later, completing their family. The Newcomb ranch prospered, as did the town of Raton. Prudence eventually became the principal of the new school that was built to accommodate the growing population, training new teachers in her methods that balanced structure with exploration, discipline with joy. William, true to his early promise, became a renowned naturalist, publishing books of his bird illustrations and observations that were acclaimed throughout the country. He often credited his stepmother with encouraging his passion and giving him the tools to express it. In 1898, on their 20th anniversary, Zachary surprised Prudence with a trip back to Boston to visit her family. As they stood on the deck of the train, watching the eastern landscape roll by, so different from their New Mexico home, Zachary squeezed her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About staying in Raton all those years ago?" Prudence looked up at the man whose love had transformed her life, thinking of their children, their students, the community they had helped build together. "Not one," she replied with absolute certainty. "You taught me what I was really seeking, Zach. Not just to impart knowledge, but to nurture hearts, including my own." "We taught each other," he corrected gently, the silver in his hair catching the sunlight. "And we're still learning every day." As the train carried them east, Prudence's thoughts returned to that first confrontation in the schoolhouse, when a concerned father had challenged a too strict teacher. How fortunate she was that Zachary had seen not just her flaws, but her potential, just as she had learned to see the potential in each child who passed through her classroom doors. In the end, that was the greatest lesson of all, that behind every stern exterior might lie a heart full of love, waiting only for the right person to help it bloom.